Hey everyone, this is chapter 9 of Bruno Rizzi's The Bureaucratization of the World, which is titled The Reign of the Petite Bourgeoisie. Again, like I've said in the other videos, I'm only going to be reading part 1 of this because that's all I have access to right now. We define it thus because... We define it thus because the phenomenon in general, not merely is general, not merely Russian. In the USSR, it is primarily bureaucratic because it was born of the bureaucracy. But in totalitarian countries, it draws its strength naturally from among technicians, specialists, trade union, and party functionaries of all kinds and colors. Its material comes from... One second. Its material comes from the great army of the state and parastate bureaucracy, from company managers, from the army, from the free professions, and even from the labor aristocracy. The so-called subversive parties, displaying their political imbecility, have pushed the middle classes into the arms of capitalism. The time has now come when the middle class can give free rein to the middle class's rancor against the middle class's former masters and against those unwilling to overlook its inevitable and organic weaknesses. The proletariat, instead of conciliating and harnessing these characteristics, giving at least some satisfaction to the petite bourgeois mentality, now sees it lined up against it in the role of ruling class. The whole economic, political, moral, and artistic world reflects the mentality of this middle class. Nationalization is limited to the large enterprises, and in Russia the opposite happens to what one would expect. The ownership of consumption goods becomes sacred. This has been reestablished in Russia. One does not strive to accumulate capital, but rather to achieve, quote, the good life, end quote, and that naturally by moving up the bureaucratic ladder. At the top, things are evened out, but halfway up the ladder, differences appear, and to keep the situation stable, the state is taken over and held in a firm grip. The cult of the state begins to appear. It becomes ubiquitous, present, all-seeing, all-powerful. Under pressure from the top downwards, the economy becomes hierarchical, as happens on every bureaucratic ladder. Politically, all parties become one party, and that one becomes a state organ rather than a party. The petite bourgeoisie, distinct from capitalist or socialist democracy, is intransigent and absolute. For the petite bourgeoisie has no well-defined program. The nationalist concepts of heroism, of devotion to the leader, etc., have come back into fashion in an exaggerated form in Russia. The morality of the petite bourgeois family returns with its idol, its God, and the authority of the father, of a man over woman. Abortions for those who can pay, etc., have all returned. The Russian bureaucrat feels himself master and boss, and his contempt for the worker is the logical consequence. Quote, "You were born to work," end quote, he murmurs to himself. All this does not surprise us too much. What are they, all these union and party mandarins, if not petite bourgeois, flattering their proletarian followers in the shop, but keeping his dossier hidden and waiting under the inkwell? And when their colleagues reach power, they are immediately at their beck and call, happy to have found a solid source of funds which does not suffer capitalist market fluctuations, a well-supplied source which is theirs only on one condition, complete bureaucratic obedience. It is not difficult to understand, but we may ask where was and where is the proletariat? It really deserves its misfortune a tiny bit, for a class which is seeking power should not be so weak as to be subjugated by its own bureaucracy, even in a pre-revolutionary period. In place of a state dissolving from below, We have a state which has swollen up in the process of bureaucratizing the economy from the top downwards. The palace of the Soviets, 360 meters high, will be the emblem of this period, the Bastille of the bureaucratic world. That actually appears to be the end of the book. The next is, 1 second. Shit, that's it. That's the end of the book. End of part 1 of The Bureaucratization of the World by Bruno Rizzi. I'm gonna read the appendix and the end and the rest of the references. So, appendix, table of contents of the 1939 edition. This has been compiled from the printed table of contents of the 1939 edition, plus headings from Rizzi's typescript for part 2. Table of contents. Part 1, the USSR, Bureaucratic Collectivism, class property, end parenthesis. Preface. Chapter 1, the nature of the Soviet state. Chapter 2, in the camp of agrément. Chapter 3, class property. Chapter 4, bureaucratic exploitation. Chapter 5, the proletariat. Chapter 6, nationalization. Chapter 7, bourgeois restoration. Chapter 8, defining the USSR. Chapter 9, the reign of the petite bourgeoisie. The reign of the petite bourgeoisie, which is the chapter I just read. And then part 2 was titled, that I'm not reading, it's titled The Totalitarian State, parenthesis, unnumbered typescript and materials, end parenthesis. Introduction, the end of imperialism, the proletariat's lack of political maturity, necessities of nationalization, disintegration and aggregation, fascist ideas on the economy, the fascist conception of the state. Part 3 was titled, Quo Vadis America? Question mark, parenthesis, is it a, quote, New Deal, end quote? Question mark, end parenthesis. So there's a preface. Chapter 1, the end of capitalism. Chapter 2, the New Deal at work. Chapter 3, the economy of Alibaba. Chapter 4, social technique. Chapter 5, overproduction. Chapter 6, the third argument, the quote, third argument, end quote, of Mr. Wallace. Chapter 7, did Europe want this? Chapter 8, administration and revolution. Chapter 9, the methods of American social technique. Chapter 10, permanent equilibrium. Chapter 11, the middle way. Chapter 12, what does America want? Chapter 8, in the depths. Chapter 13, in the depths. Chapter 14, the new society of and the professors of economics. Chapter 5, economic democracy. Chapter 16, the fruit. Chapter 17, the philosophy of the, quote, New Deal, end quote. Chapter 18, enveloping the economy and the state. Chapter 19, summary. And there's an appendix titled, Where is the World Going? Chapter 1, Bureaucratic Collectivism. Chapter 2, The Tragedy of the Proletariat. Chapter 3, The Triumph of Historical Materialism. Chapter 4, The Jewish Question. Chapter 5, The Workers in the New Society. Chapter 6, The Great Change Explained in to the Workers. Chapter 7, The Nature of the State in the New Society. Chapter 8, The Politics of the Proletariat. Chapter 9, New Revision. Chapter 10, Appeal to Men. So that's the table of contents. of the original book. Again, this book that I'm reading from only has part 1. Yeah. And now we're gonna read. I'm gonna read the references. Both published and unpublished materials are included. A number of the unpublished or rare items listed are located among the papers deposited with Turin University after Rizzi's death, parenthesis, quote, Rizzi's papers, end quote, end parenthesis. Where this is so, it is indicated. So the first is M. Albro, 1970, Bureaucracy. Daniel Bell, 1959, The Strange Tale of Bruno R., it published in the New Leader, parenthesis, September 28th, 1959, end parenthesis. See also the correspondence in the 12th of October and 16th of November issues. Daniel Bell, 1974, The Coming of Post-Industrial Society. Paul Bellis, 1979, Marxism in the USSR. Aniberti, Anticipazioni anarchistica sui nuovi padroni. Alright, I'm not going to read anything that's in a foreign language. B. Bongiovanni, 1982, The Dissolution of Trotskyism. James Burnham, 1938, From Formula to Reality, on this channel. James Burnham, The Managerial Revolution. I have an excerpt from that on this channel. J.T. Burnett, American Trotskyism and the Russian Question. It's funny because that's actually what I'm writing about, so I should probably find that thesis. Antonio Carlo, The Socioeconomic Nature of the USSR, published in Telos. Antonio Carlo and Umberto Melotti, In Memory of Bruno Rizzi, published in Telos. That's on this channel. Joseph Carter, 1938, The Class Nature of the Stalinist State. That's not on this channel, but it should be. G. Ciano, 1948, Diaries, 1939 to 1943. Ante Siliga, The Russian Enigma, 1938. Sir Walter Citrine, 1936, I Search for Truth in Russia. Tony Cliff, 1971, The Theory of Bureaucratic Collectivism, A Critique, which is on this channel, which is featured in Duncan Hallis's edited volume, The Fourth International Stalinism and the Origins of the International Socialists, some documents. Stephen F. Cohen, 1975, Bukharin and the Bolshevik Revolution. Some things by Yvan Craipeau, but I have a piece from Yvan Craipeau on this channel. B. Claxey, Preface to Bureaucratization of the World. A. Cunliffe, 1979, The Competition for the Palace of the Soviets in Moscow, 1931, 1933, published in Architectural Association Quarterly, Volume 2, Part 2. P. Delhi, 1984, The Manchester Guardian and the Soviet Purges, 1936-38, published in Survey. Isaac Deutscher, 1954, 1984, The Mysticism of Cruelty. Reprinted in Isaac Deutscher, 1969, Heretics and Renegades. Isaac Deutscher, 1970, The Prophet Unarmed, Trotsky, 1921 to 1929. Deutscher, 1979, The Prophet Outcast, Trotsky, 1929 to 1940. Milovan Gilas, 1952, Class or Caste, reprinted in Gilas's Parts of a Lifetime. Milovan Gilas, 1957, The New Class. Milovan Gilas, 1975, Parts of a Lifetime. J. Ellenstein, 1976, The Stalin Phenomenon. Lawrence and Wishart. Friedrich Engels, Anti-Düring. J. Fenwick, 1948, The Mysterious Bruno R. That's going to be on this channel. G. Galley, 1976, Introductory Essay. G. Galley, Bruno Rizzi e la Nuova Classe. R. Gambin, 1978, The Radical Tradition. Alvin Goldner, 1970, The Future of Intellectuals and the Rise of the New Class. J. Hansen, 1941, Review of the Managerial Revolution, published in Forest International. It's Joseph Hansen. G. Henine, 1958, Bruno R. et la Nouvelle Classe. Rudolf Hilferding, State Capitalism or Totalitarian State Economy. And J. Steinberg's The Verdict of 3 Decades. 1 second. Sorry, I just wanted to see if I can write that down. So I want to read that piece. D.C. Hodges, 1981, The Bureaucratization of Socialism. Irving Howe, A Margin of Hope, An Intellectual Autobiography. J.P. Joubert, 1977. Something in French, never mind. Eugene Kamenka and M. Craigier, edited volume 1979, Bureaucracy, The Career of a Concept. W. Kendall, 1962. Bruno Rizzi, Socialism and the Bureaucratic Society. Baruch Knai-Paz, The Social and Political Thought of Leon Trotsky. I have certain excerpts from that on this channel. Leszek Kolakowski, 1981, Main Currents in Marxism, published London, Oxford University Press. Irving Kristol, 1983, Reflections of a Neoconservative. Antonio Labriola, something in 1936, Le Crépuscule de la Civilisation, l'Occident et les peuples des couleurs. I don't know. D. Lane, 1982, The End of Social Equality, ? Social Inequality, ? Lucien Leroy, 1940, Marxism and Democracy. Really want to read that. Lucien Leroy is like Bruno Rizzi and the third camp Trotskyists. Also has a form of a bureaucratic collectivist thesis. That's what at least that's what he's categorized under in the Marcel van der Landen's Western Marxism and the Soviet Union. Dwight MacDonald, 1942, Review of the Managerial Revolution. Umberto Melotti, 1977, Marx and the Third World. C.A. Myers, 1977, The Prophet's Army, Trotskyists in America, 1928-1941. I have a chapter from that book, I have a chapter of that book on here, the one about the 1939 to 40 debate and split. Pierre Neville, 1938, La Situation en URSS, Quatrième Internationale. More stuff from Pierre Neville. Max Nomad, 1959, Aspects of Revolt. George Orwell, 1946. James Burnham and the Managerial Revolution. I'd like to read that. El Pelicani, 1977. Introduction to Il Collectivismo Bureaucratico. Something by a G.P. Prandtstraller. It's a hell of a name. Rakovsky, Declaration of the Opposition. something by an El Rapone, 1978, Trotsky e il fascismo. Rizzi's file, a file of 30 documents concerning Rizzi in the Archivo Centrale dello Stato, Rome. Casolario Politico Centrale. It's a bunch of shit from Rizzi that's just like in Italian or French. So we'll skip through all of that. Something by Raccogni Rossi, 1976. J. Roussel. M. Sawyer, Theories of the New Class from Bakunin to Kuran, and Modulevsky, The Morphology of Permanent Protest. I think it's Marian Sawyer, Socialism and the New Class. Max Shachtman, 1962, The Bureaucratic Revolution, which is a collection of his old essays that he kind of like tinkered with later. Max Shachtman, 1939, published in 1962, Whither Russia, Trotsky and His Critics. P. Souris, 1970, Les Marxismes et Presse, Marx. S. Stojanovic, 1973, Between Ideals and Reality. I think he also had a bureaucratic collectivist conception of the USSR, kind of developed independently. I'm not sure where he's from. I think he might be from Finland. I'm not sure. S. Sturman, 1980, State Property and the Nature of the Soviet Ruling Class, Monthly Review. A. Tosca, 1969, something. Trotsky, the USSR and War, Trotsky, the Revolution Betrayed, Trotsky and Defensive Marxism, Trotsky, Writings of Leon Trotsky, 1937-38, United States Department of State, 1948, Nazi-Soviet Relations, Washington, D.C., Max Weber, 1968, Economy and Society, B.M. Weinberg, 1980, A Community on Trial, The Jews of Paris in the 1930s, and M. Yvan, something by M. Yvan, 1938. And that is the end. Thank you for listening.